Hello YouTube and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Red Dead Online and we're going to be talking about some weapons that I think really should and definitely could be added to the game. And now, as we all know, or at least those of us that have been playing the game, there's a decent variety of guns, but there's a lot of guns famous in the Old West and that would have been common to find at this time period that are not in the game. You can't get them anywhere, which sucks. And I definitely think more guns need to be added into the game because guns are a big part of the lore and legend of the Wild West. So I've compiled a list of 5 weapons that I definitely think really need to be added at some point in the future. So, as I'll show you here on screen, the first thing I'm going to do is remind you that if you like this video and if you've watched any of my videos before, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? My channel really needs subscriptions to grow. 95% of the people that watch my videos don't subscribe. So it'd be great if you could go ahead and click that button, ring the bell. That way you can be notified when I release more Red Dead videos in the future, which I definitely will. So, now that that's out of the way, the other thing I'd like to say is definitely like the video if you like it, and if you have any other guns that you would like to see from this time period, please, because I don't want to see any M2 Browning 50 cal machine guns being added into the game, definitely let me know down in the comment section. So if there's a favorite gun you have that you want added into the game that existed at this time period, definitely drop that down in the comment section. But with all that in mind, let's just dive on in and get to my first pick. So the first thing I'd like to talk about for things that I think should be added to the game is actually old and outdated weapons, things that still existed at this time but weren't cutting edge. Now we already have one of those in the 1851 Navy revolver, because by the time this game takes place, that's definitely a pretty old and outdated weapon. Now, people still used it, especially considering there was the, at that time they already had a lot of factory brass casing conversion 1851 Navies, so it wasn't a black powder, you know, front-loading, super outdated revolver anymore. It was contemporary, and people like Wild Bill Hickok still definitely use them, but it's an older gun. And we also have things like bows added into the game, which were still being used because they still had their uses. So my argument is, why can't we have other iconic, outdated weapons that people definitely used in the Wild West? They just weren't as common. With this, I'm definitely talking about things like maybe a crossbow. Crossbows existed. They'd existed for hundreds of years at this point, and they were still used. Not commonly, obviously, but they still existed, and I see no reason why one couldn't be added to the game. So that's something I'd like to see. On top of that, something that would be seen more common would be standard percussion muzzle-loading instruments, things that would have been used extensively throughout the Civil War, and then a lot of people moving out west. That was, for quite a few people for quite some time, the only weapons that they had. Now, I'm not saying we should be running around with 1700s flintlock pistols, but I definitely think percussion rifles and muskets would be something that would be interesting to see. So those are things that I would like to see. So that's the first one. That's not a specific weapon. What I've been talking about there, that's just a broad category, but I definitely think that it would add really interesting variety to the game. So that's my first one. Let's move on to number 2, which is going to be the first specific weapon that we talk about today. So at number 2, I have the Sharpe's big bore rifles. So this is what a lot of people are going to call a buffalo gun, which is not totally accurate because it was used for a lot of things, but it was definitely used for buffalo hunting because it was very accurate. It had great long range abilities and was super powerful, so it made it the perfect weapon for hunting buffalo. As far as the Sharpe's rifle goes, they're a series of large bore single shot. They're falling block, which means they're breech loading, so after you shoot, it opens up on the back and you slide another round in. So they're breech loading rifles. The rolling block rifle is very similar to what they are, so we already have something like them in the game, but I think we could go a little bit further with the Sharpe's rifle. This is one that, if it was implemented in the game, I would prefer for it to not have a scope option, because that's never what it was used as. I mean, I'm sure someone later on in history that already had a Sharpe's rifle and they got a scope and put it on there, I'm sure that existed, but most of them would have had adjustable level sights, and that's something that I would like to see added into the game, because I think it would just really beef up the variety of the longer range rifles in the game. As far as the benefits, like what I would like to see them really focus on if they were to implement it, I would want it to be very accurate, because the Sharpe's rifle was well known for its pinpoint accuracy, and it would obviously need to be a large caliber, so it should have nice high damage. I would say maybe less than the elephant gun, but it would also need to have way more realistic recoil, because the elephant gun, now mind you, I've shot a large bore gun that's used for elephant hunting before, and it never once knocked me over. I'm a big guy and I'm pretty experienced with firearms, but I think what they gave it in the game is really unrealistic, and it makes it almost useless to use. If they implement the Sharpe's rifle, the buffalo rifle in the game, I do not want it to be like the elephant rifle. I want it to be far more realistic than that. So, and like I said, I would prefer for it to not have a scope option, because historically, at the time it was being used, scopes were not widely available to most people, and like I said, the adjustable level sight would be just far better for historical accuracy. Plus gameplay. So that's the next one I wanted to talk about. That was number 4. Let's move on to number 3. So at number 3, we have either the Colt M1900 or the M1900 Browning, which is the one that's in single player already. If you've played the single player campaign for Red Dead 2, you'll know that once you get to San Denis, or at least not once you get there, but when you get there in the story, you unlock the ability to get the M1900 Browning, which looks a lot like the Colt M1900, and it's going to be a precursor to the 1911. So it's the first semi-automatic handgun ever made where it integrated a full slide, which is what we're pretty used to now with semi-automatic handguns. The examples that we have before that were like the semi-auto pistol in the game, or the Mauser pistol, which is what I'm actually currently using in the gameplay that I'm using for this video. And they had a partial slide. So the M1900 Browning is the first one where it has the full-length slide, and it looks and feels a lot more like we're used to with modern handguns. Definitely looks very cool. It's in single player, it's probably my favorite semi-automatic pistol to use, just on the whole, because it shoots really well. And the reason I have the M1900 on here, the Browning instead of the Colt, is mostly just because it's already in the game. They have it in single player. All they have to do is add it to online. If we're going to be historically accurate, it should be slightly less accurate than the smaller caliber ones that we currently have, like the Mauser, but it should obviously have quite a bit more damage because the caliber of the M1900 Browning was 38 ACP, so it was a little bit fatter and slower of a round, so it did more damage. In my opinion, it should be decently similar in damage to a revolver, but having that faster fire rate and then a lower ammo capacity, because I believe the Browning M1900 actually only held 7 rounds. So like I said, I think it would, if they implemented it correctly, it would add extra variety into the current guns that everyone's using. You give it less rounds than the Mauser and the semi-auto, it won't completely negate those ones and make it slightly less accurate, but give it that higher power and still have it be nice and accurate. It could still benefit from, obviously, the faster reload speed of pistols. So that's number 3. Let's move on to number 2, the second to last gun that I would like to see added into this game. And that gun is the Winchester Model 1876. Now, this is a super, super obscure rifle in history. Now, I shouldn't say obscure because there was something like 68,000 of these things made after they were released. So they weren't definitely like a super rare gun. They just weren't nearly as widely found as like the 1886 or other common lever action ones. And that's because this was actually a big bore rifle, which is why I think it would be fun to have it added into the game as a rifle, not a repeater. But it would be a lever action because it's a lever action rifle in real life. So this one, it was originally chambered in 45-75, which is a pretty big caliber, and it was actually really famous for the time. Nowadays, the closest thing we have is a 45-70. It's a similar round, ballistically speaking, but it's a slower moving rifle round, but it deals a lot of damage, and it has decently low recoil because, I mean, that goes hand in hand with the slower moving. It just doesn't have as big of a powder load as other things for this. So I would like this to be kind of a bridging gap between most repeaters and rifles in terms of range and accuracy, but that nice high damage, almost as much damage as like close range 12 gauge deer slug, because it's definitely a big round. So I think gameplay wise it would add a huge variety to the game, and like I said, it's a real gun that existed at this time and would have been decently well known, especially in areas like in the game in West Elizabeth, where you've got large game and dangerous predators, because that's what the gun was originally intended for. The repeaters, contemporary repeaters at the time, were decently small caliber, so they weren't very good, especially as personal defense against things like grizzly bears and cougars and things that you needed to be able to quickly take down with one shot. And that's where I think this gun would come in handy. And it obviously wouldn't hold as many rounds as a repeater, but it would hold slightly more than the rifles, because I believe it held 6 rounds. So that's why I think the Winchester Model 1876 would be a great addition to the game. That's number 2. Let's move on to the final gun I want to see added, and this one is by far the one that I would like to see the most. So at number 1, we have the Remington Model 1875, which is going to be an I think a lot of people are going to know what I'm talking about here, because this is probably one of the most requested guns to see added into the game, at least that I've seen, and I get why, because A, it looks super cool, and B, it's a very iconic weapon from the Wild West. Now, the main revolver at this time period back then would have been the Colt Single Action Army Revolver, otherwise known as the Peacemaker. It was developed and started being sold started being sold because the development almost certainly started earlier, but it started becoming widely spread in 1872. 3 years before the Remington 1875, which is why it became so popular. It became the standard service rifle, the U.S. military, or service handgun. The U.S. military purchased just a ton of Colt single-action Army revolvers, so you had them all over the place. There were surplus sales, and they became popular, and people got used to using them, so they bought them in their civilian life, which is why the Colt single-action Army dominated the world. But the Remington Model 1875 is just objectively a better revolver. It was very similar in the way that it worked, but it was more rugged, so it was less likely to be damaged, especially in tough use, which is why it was favored among people who lived lives where things got damaged, ranchers and cowboys and such. They were actually far more common to use the Remington Model 1875 over the Colt single-action Army. It also had an extra frame brace down below the ejection lever that helped chamber the gun in higher calibers. So this one actually had 44 was available in this one, which was not an option for the Colt single-action Army. So if they added this to the game, they could actually add it as a larger caliber revolver, which I think I would really enjoy. It was also well known for being extremely durable and rugged and very, very accurate. The single thing that makes it so much better than the Colt single-action Army revolver is that, like all of the Remington service revolvers that they made, it had a removable cylinder. Instead of having to reload it one round at a time, like you do with the Colt single-action Army, this one you could pop the entire cylinder out and put a fully loaded cylinder in, making the reload time for skilled people with these revolvers something like a second, which would be amazing. They could add a gun with slightly higher damage than the Cattleman or even the Navy revolver, give it nice high accuracy like the Navy revolver, and a super high reload speed. The only downside, I guess, from Rockstar's perspective is if they add the Remington Model 1875, it will quickly become the single best handgun in the game, and nobody will want to use anything else, because that's just the way that it goes when you try to keep things realistic. So that is my list of the 5 weapons, or, you know, for number 1, it wasn't one specific weapon, it was more of a weapon type, but those are the ones that I think the game needs added the most. What do you think? Are there any guns that I didn't list that you definitely want, or are there any ones on my list that you think are not necessary for the game? I would obviously love to know, so please let me know down in the comment section below. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.